And Shirley, a story that's written before the country of India was established. The story that was written before the First World War. 1908 was the year, and it was very popular at the time. Hell, it even got an adaptation in 1919, and somehow got an anime adaptation made of it in 1979. And has the legend Hayao Miyazaki of Studio Ghibli working on it. And over the years, this little story has gotten 13 adaptations, and the latest one being done by the Answer Studio, whom, from my understanding, is just a branch of Comic Studio. You know, Comic Studio, the anime studio that brought you Your Name and all those pretty anime films. Somehow, someway, the Answer Studio have made a decent enough adaptation to even rival the adaptation in 1979, having its own charm with its incredible background art, great voice acting and dialogue work, arguably better pacing, and dare I say, better character design than its 1979 counterpart. So Anne Shirley is a slice of life anime, and it follows a big chunk of Anne's life. From the moment that girl finally got out of the orphanage, to her finding her first friend in Diana, to hitting Gilbert in the head with a board. But I do have to say, Anne Shirley is not your typical slice of life anime. It is in fact adapting a novel from the 1900s. So there isn't really a moe moe moment. There is definitely not going to be a funny moment compilation of this anime. What it has is some really grounded and real moment. Anne Shirley is this eccentric, romantic, overly naive at times girl who you can't help to cheer for. I mean, who doesn't want a daughter just like Anne Shirley? I think one of the most underrated parts of the story, though, is how the story sometimes tackles death. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I have this weird fascination about cheery slice of life talking about death. Without going into too much spoilers here, there are two deaths in the show. One relatively sudden, but got foreshadowed for a while. The other relatively out of nowhere, but has a whole episode covering it. They are both tragic in their own ways. It's a shock to me in how a show that is relatively cheerful and mundane at times can hit you with something so sudden and real like death out of nowhere. But as they say, death is a part of life, and boy do those part of the show hit. Now, I think there is something to be said here in the fact that Anne Shirley is an anime adaptation. Because this is a Canadian work written in the Queen's language by a Canadian author, and although at times it feels weird because she speaks like a Japanese maiden in the middle of Canada, it makes up to it by having comics film-esque anime backgrounds that leave your jaws on the floor. Like looking at anime Anne Shirley and comparing it to the live action adaptations make you realize how ugly this world is. The live action adaptation just feels like it's taken place in the Boondocks. The anime feels like it's taken place in a fairy tale land. And the fact that Anne Shirley names these spots in these majestic ways just fit perfect. A credit needs to go to Inoue Honaka, who is the seiyuu of Anne Shirley. Because I would imagine reading those long-winded, translated, and way too romanticized wording isn't easy. Like, she speaks as if her life is a poem. And her voice truly carries some scenes at times. I might get some flack here, but I think the character design of the new adaptation is better than the old one. I understand that that's just how anime looked in 1970, but like, Space Adventure Cobra didn't look like his head had a tumor growing out of it. Why did Anne Shirley look like she was dying from head cancer? Also, Matthew just looks better in the new adaptations. He looks a little bit younger, has a more kinder face, a bit more of a father figure than a grandfather figure. The one thing I thought wasn't so great was the show's pacing. It feels like the show introduced us to a character and not talk about them for a while, then out of nowhere, Anne's really close friends with them, or they're dying from tuberculosis or something. And I thought, man, I wish this show was One Piece long so I could invest on these characters some more. And then I saw where the 1979 adaptation ended. And that had like 50 episodes to the 2025 adaptation only having 24 episodes. The 1979 adaptation ended when finally Anne and Gilbert became friends. The 2025 adaptation was very focused on the romance between Anne and Gilbert, especially in the last 6 episodes of the first season. And I think the way the newer adaptation ended with Anne and Gilbert getting married, that is just by far the better place to end the show. And you know what's crazy about all of it? The new adaptation have only adapted 3 out of the 8 books that are out there. And a bit of a spoiler, but come on, this is a century-old book, and who knows if this adaptation even gets a second season. Anne and Gilbert has children, and I don't know when this happens, but Gilbert gets sent to war. Like, dude, that's crazy. I'm sort of pissed that they didn't adapt that. Look, the chances of Anne Shirley getting a season 2 is small, but it isn't none. I mean, people like this show in Japan, and I hope it does get a second season because there's still so much to cover, and it deserves a good adaptation. Sorry, Miyazaki.